How did you get into what you do now?
Well,
Today on the BOLOTOR podcast, we're excited to have Sanni McCandless Hannold join us. Sanni is a life and transition coach, co-founder of Out Wild, and an advocate for living an adventurous, purpose-driven life. Rock climbing, like emotionally, like heights, or how'd you navigate that?
When I started, I still have fear when I climb in certain settings, in certain locations, certain ways, but I think I just loved the movement inherently. I loved sort of the problem-solving aspect of climbing. I loved that I could kind of compete with myself every time I went in, okay, I climbed this route last time, can I do this one this time?
What were some of your biggest challenges in the beginning?
There's definitely been different times, I had a year where a few people I knew died in the mountains. The fear is, it's there, you're dealing with it, but most days it doesn't outweigh the fun. And that was always kind of the draw. I just always really loved the actual movement and the sport of it.
All right, we're here with Sanni Hannold, and we're going to get into some rock climbing. We're going to get into, she's in Vegas, which is, I'm thinking casinos and buffets. And she's like, no, it's rock climbing out here. I'm like, we got the mountains 45 minutes away. And so we got a, very interesting story. So I want to go back to do what we do in the origin of things. Let's go back to where you're from. What did mom and dad do for a living? How did you get into what you do now? How did you segue into that? Tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm like, okay, let me just roll back in time here. I was born in Washington State. My family, my dad's an engineer. My mom's a writer. She's been a paralegal. She's been a program manager. She's worn many hats. And my family was always really into the outdoors. When I was growing up in Washington, we did a lot of backpacking and hiking. And then when I was 11, we moved across the country to North Carolina. My dad's work transferred out there. And I think, we did outdoorsy stuff in North Carolina too, but for the next kind of 11 years I lived out there. I went to high school, I went to college, and it wasn't a huge part of my life. I didn't climb when I lived out there. I hadn't even gotten into climbing at all yet. But loved growing up there, loved North Carolina. And when I graduated from college, I moved back to Washington State. And that's sort of when my relationship with the outdoors, my personal relationship with the outdoors really began to blossom. I began to say like, hey, I'm used to relying on my family to plan outdoor stuff, but now I live here and I'm an adult and I'm on my own. And if I want to go hiking, I got to learn how to find those trails, learn how to read maps, learn how to plan a backpacking trip and have all the gear. And that was kind of the beginning of my sort of personal outdoor journey. And then my sister got me into rock climbing. She was part of an alpine group in the area, and she got into rock climbing and alpine climbing. And she sort of roped me and my parents in to go to the gym. And I loved rock climbing right away. And that kind of led to a series of things. I met my husband, who's a rock climber. I quit my job and went on the road for a year. And it a little bit led me to, or eventually led me to where I am today. And I do outdoor retreats, and I do career and transition coaching for people who want the outdoors and their values to be a bigger part of their life.
How did, when your sister introduced you to rock climbing, what were you doing before that? And how were you, emotionally, were you just take it to her right away, or like, really, heights, or what was that like? How'd you navigate that?
I think it's and not that you implied this, but I do just also think that there's a bit of a misconception that people who like rock climbing aren't afraid of heights. Mm-hmm. And I think the reality is just that, people who love rock climbing sort of, most people have a very natural response to being up high. We're protective of our bodies. We don't want to fall. We don't want to get hurt. And so, with climbing, of course, fears come up for almost anyone, whether it's because you're lead climbing or because you're just up high or the nature of it, you're outside, you're inside, wherever you're doing it, however you're doing it, probably some fears are going to come up. And I definitely had fear when I started. I still have fear when I climb in certain settings, in certain locations, certain ways. And it's, but I think I just loved the movement inherently. I loved sort of the problem-solving aspect of climbing. I loved that I could I could kind of compete with myself every time I went in, okay, I climbed this route last time. Can I do this one this time? And so the fear is, you're kind of, it's there, you're dealing with it, but it doesn't outweigh most days it doesn't outweigh the fun. And that was always kind of the draw. I just always really loved the actual movement and the sport of it.
Yeah. What were some of your biggest challenges in the beginning?
I think anytime you pick up a new hobby, there's just that aspect of how am I going to make time for this in my life? I think we all want to live lives that excite us. And there's this quote that actually, I don't know if I've ever found out who said it, but it's the insatiable momentum of the ordinary, that like just ordinary life has this pull, right? And it's very hard to get out of that pull. It's hard to fight that momentum, to actually make things unique and different and out of the routine and, once in a lifetime experiences. It's hard to step out of that. And anytime you decide that you're interested in something new, it just takes a lot of intentional effort to say, okay, I'm going to change up my routine and I'm going to make time and space for this and I'm going to make it a priority. And so, probably that's like the biggest thing at first. And then since then, my journey with rock climbing my relationship with climbing has only grown over time, but there's definitely been different times. I had a year where a few people I knew died in the mountains, and that was really challenging and really made me question my relationship with the sport and question the sport at all. And so those types of things, they slow you down and they make you kind of question what your values are and what your priorities are and why you do something. But ultimately, everyone's going to die, and I'm probably more at risk getting in my car and driving in. If anybody here has driven in Las Vegas, where everyone drives 15 over the speed limit and there's like 6-lane service streets, I just have to be aware, or, the risk of, eating a hamburger and sitting in my office all day to die of heart disease. Like there's risk everywhere. Sometimes it's super obvious, like in climbing, and sometimes it's hidden, like in driving or in sitting or whatever. And so for me, it just became this equation of, this really brings me to life and it's worth it to be alive while I'm alive.
Right. No one gets out of this alive. That's what they say.
No one gets out of this alive. Yeah.
So take us through like the milestones of your journey in rock climbing, because then you're going to get into, your coaching work and all that. So, but first take us through, what mountains did you start off with and what did that look like? And then, where did you go from there and how did you progress and your journey with that?
Yeah. I think my evolution is, let's say, I don't climb snowy mountains. I don't ice climb or alpine climb. Most of my climbing is called sport climbing or bouldering. So those are like predominantly what we would call a single pitch route. It's like think about like one length or half a length of a rope. You can go up and then you can get lowered back down. And that's the distance of the climb, maybe 30, 40 feet. Sorry, not 30, maybe let's say 50 feet. But, most of the climbing I do is single pitch or bouldering, which is sort of, you don't even use any ropes. You just have these big boulders and you set pads out. And it's very much about max effort. When you go into the alpine, you aren't necessarily using your fingers or your muscles to their absolute limitability, but you're doing all sorts of other things. You're using your skill and knowledge about ice. You're using your skill and knowledge about how to rope up and how to navigate the terrain and all of these different things. And that's something that, I can admire from afar, but don't personally do. But I think my journey was really more of one of just falling in love with the outdoors. It was more about, at the beginning being like, okay, I'm going to go on my first backpacking trip where I have to have all the gear and I have to figure out where to go. And I have to figure out how we're going to get water and how we're going to cook and how to set up the tent. And then progressing from there to being like, okay, I want to hike the John Muir Trail. Okay, that's 211 miles. And I have to, we're doing it in October. So I have to make sure I'm prepared for the first snow. And I have to make sure I'm prepared because half of the food drops are closed. And that progressed to doing really long, sort of day hikes alone in the mountains. That progressed to, my climbing at the same time. I was just climbing what we call a grade, is how difficult a rock climb is. So doing harder and harder grades in my rock climb, starting with 5.6 or 5.7. And I've climbed up to 5.13, and these are very niche numbers. You'd only care if you really care about rock climbing. But the idea being that I just sort of focused on what was holding me back, which honestly, fear held me back a lot. When you're climbing and you're lead climbing, you're often spending time sort of above your protection. So if you let go, you're going to take some amount of fall, and it's safe. You have a rope. But it took me a while to kind of learn how to be in that space without losing my shit, And so slowly climbing harder and harder, upping my physical fitness, but also learning to calm my mind. And it kind of, now I run two different businesses. I have a 2-year-old. I'm actually pregnant with my second daughter.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of it is just about continuing to make sure it's a priority and being willing for it to look however it looks. Sometimes that's climbing really hard. Sometimes that's taking my daughter out and going on a walk in the boulders. And so it's just about being flexible with it and being okay with it looking lots of different ways in every different phase of life.
I did see the documentary, Free Solo. That was okay. So there's free climbing, and then do you do free climbing or is it rope climbing? And tell us about, for people that don't know, tell us about the differences and the dynamics and the two different worlds and what all that entails.
So free soloing is when you climb without a rope. And actually, technically, free climbing is just climbing without ever using your protection. So that means that if I do a sport route, but I never have to weight my rope, like I successfully do it without falling, without needing any support or help, then that's technically free climbing. But the confusion between the word free climbing and free soloing is very common. But you would just maybe say it's free soloing, which is without a rope, and roped climbing, which is with a rope. And so, tell me more about your question. You want to know more about the difference between the two?
Yeah. So, and also, what was your journey like with that? You start off with a rope, obviously. Did you climb without the rope? And because I don't know if you did that in the documentary, but I'm trying to also, remember what were your challenges? And also a different question before I forget. And that is, when you go from novice to a different world to where you're like, wow, this is like the epitome of, this is the elite of this world. This is intense. Things start off as a hobby, and then you progress and you look back and how did you navigate that? And how did you look at that? And it was like, wow, this is really, a lot, the whole world. Cause you went from your sister introducing you to this sport, for you in the middle of the vortex of this sport, to the elite. So how did you navigate that? What was that like? That's a separate question, but maybe we could segue into that from, what's it like, what you were doing with rope climbing, and then, what did you get into? Did you segue? I don't recall if you segued into, free climbing or free soloing, or I still don't know the difference between the two. So forgive me.
So I almost never free solo. I've done some really easy, what I would call scrambling, which is like where you are not using a rope, but you're on terrain that's very, very easy for you, very comfortable for you. And so you feel confident that you're not going to fall. And so I've done a tiny bit of very easy scrambling in the mountains, usually in kind of more alpine terrain where it's like part of a big hike, or, it helps you get to the very end of a big hike or something like that. But no, I think most climbers don't really dabble in free soloing. I think it's a very small niche group who get very drawn to that aspect. A lot of climbers probably do a small amount of it in really easy ways, like the way I do. But I think most people don't quite go there. And then as far as, I think There's a lot of different facets to your question about how I navigated this jump from, I'm climbing before work in Seattle at the gym to I'm living in a van in Yosemite and I'm surrounded by climbing professionals. And I mean, I think one of the hardest aspects of that transition was to get used to being the worst person in the room. I think for a lot of people, when you do something and, we want to be good at it. As adults, we're not super comfortable with being a beginner. We don't really give ourselves a ton of time to be bad at something, to be the worst person in the room. And I think actually it limits a lot of us, because if we're not sort of inherently good at something, especially a new hobby we're trying to pick up, if we're consistently the worst person in the room, we're like, oh, I don't like climbing. I'm going to go try taking ceramics after work or whatever. And I think it's less about how good you are and more about how much joy it brings you, more about how much you love it, more about how much you want it to be a part of your life. And so that transition was interesting because I was just always like the most beginner, the most scared, the most uncomfortable, the least, the least qualified to be in the room at any given time. But my husband, I was always kind of like, don't you wish you were out here with, somebody who's another professional climber? And he had this line that I think about all the time, which is like, it's not about how hard you climb. It's about your attitude at the crag. And the crag is, what we sort of generally refer to as like wherever we're climbing. It's like a wall somewhere and with climbing routes on it. And it's such a poignant thing to say. And it, because it really gets at this idea that somebody could be the strongest person in the room, but if they have a crappy attitude and they're not fun to climb with, you don't want to go out with them. It doesn't matter how good they are. It's going to be a bummer of a day. But if someone's, going as hard as they can and having a blast and pushing themselves and, going all in on the easiest route at the crag, that person's going to be fun to climb with. It doesn't really matter what they're climbing. What matters is the fact that they want to be there and that they're having fun out there and that they're willing to just try their best and then go home. And climbing is an interesting sport because especially, with something like sport climbing, you go up to a wall and, I can belay Alex on the hardest route at the crag, and then he can belay me on the easiest route at the crag. And we're in the same place doing the same sport, but in completely different ways. And I think that's unusual. With a lot of different sports, if you're not at the same level, you can't go out and do it together. I can't be an expert scuba diver and go, into a deep cave with somebody who's never gone scuba diving before, who has only gone once or twice, right? Like we would go to different places to scuba dive. And I think climbing's unique, or sport climbing is unique, because you can kind of have this mix of all different levels and you're all just amongst it together. And so anyway, I think it was a really important life lesson. I think it just reminded me that in all areas of life, it doesn't really matter. It's not about being the best. It's about your attitude. And if you have a good attitude, it's going to take you a lot further than just being really good at something. Because if you're really good at something, but you have a bad attitude, you're going to burn out. And in a couple of years, you're not going to do it anymore.
So I like to get into like social, the social aspects of something. Like it is, I'm very cerebral like that. So I want to know, like, because you went from like, doing this thing, and then, I've gone from like, just getting into film and acting, and then you go to the Academy Awards, and you could be, I consider myself somebody that's like, humble, it's an unpenetratable wall of like, look, my roots are my roots, and I'm not going to let, Hollywood kind of affect me. But that being said, there's an emotional kind of thing to where you're doing this and then you're doing that and then that happens and then you did that and then you find yourself, oh, we're doing this now. And that whole journey is unique emotionally, socially. I want to get into, find out it's like, well, first, okay, this is what we're doing. We're rock climbing. Oh, now we're doing a documentary. Okay, I get it. Okay, wait, it got nominated? Well, okay, now we're doing that. As much as, you could have this natural kind of thing, but that's a very dynamic kind of, journey, Mm-hmm. So getting into the social aspect and how you navigated through that, it'd be interesting to know what that was like. Mm-hmm. and kind of like, the good, the bad, the ugly, and that experience. It'd be fun to know.
Yeah. I mean, the documentary was really its own beast. It was challenging and wonderful in many different ways. The When I first met Alex, I didn't know that he was planning on being in a documentary. I didn't know what his goals were. And, we were at the beginning of a relationship. And I think there was a lot of tension between me and the film crew because they're like, we're filming a documentary about Alex and you guys could break up next week. So there was definitely this push and pull of like, okay, is Sanni part of this? Is she not? And, rightfully so. I mean, most relationships fail until the one that doesn't, right? So the odds were stacked against us. And at the same time, I think that was hard. I think it was really hard to not really know what my place was, hard to not know what it was going to become. But, Alex and I stuck it out. We like made it work. We kind of proved our relationship and, proved that we were committed. And so that journey was pretty up and down, but I also think it really strengthened our relationship. We kind of knew, like, under the most tense circumstances, we were like, man, if we just, decide to break up overnight, it's going to be really confusing for a lot of people. There were just more cooks in the kitchen than just us. It wasn't just us in this private relationship where we could navigate it and continue it all on our own, only affecting us. There were just a lot more people involved, and that put a lot of pressure on. But I think we navigated it well, and in a lot of ways, it was a good test. So there's that aspect. And then there's, like the film doing as well as it did. I think I was pretty unprepared for that. I was pretty unprepared for the level of fame, of the level of just being in the public eye. And I've written some articles about this, but I think that ultimately I had a lot of anxiety. It took me a really long time to kind of calm down and to be like, you know what? A lot of people, like, because I didn't make the documentary, right? Like, it's not necessarily the way that I would tell the story. I think it's an incredible film. I think it does justice to the climb. I'm so happy with how it turned out. It's awesome, but it's not my telling of the story. And I think anytime that the world is making an opinion off of, making a judgment about you based on something that you never created, you weren't, you didn't necessarily have a say in, it's pretty challenging because you're like, well, I would have told that story a little bit differently, or I would have explained this part, or this context is really important. I mean, any story that you put out into the world, even if I had made the documentary, it's like you can't condense 2 years of relationship and 2 years of life into 20 minutes of a film that's about something much bigger and much greater. So it doesn't even matter who had made it. It's just true that, once a piece of your life is out there, people will jump to conclusions and make assumptions and think that they know you. And that was really hard at first. I was somebody who had always had sort of control over what people thought of me because it was just like either they'd met me and gotten to know me or not. And I had to adapt to a world where I was like, people are going to assume the wrong thing. And they're going to like me or not like me, hate me, love me, think I'm the worst, think I'm the best. And ultimately, I had to say, none of it matters. The only thing that matters is what I think about me, what my friends think about me, my family, what my husband thinks about me. And if I start to care about what everyone else thinks, I'm going to lose my mind. Like, I'm just going to sit on social media or sit on the internet. I'm just going to read articles and I'm just going to fall into a deep depression, So, but it was, I think that's very freeing. I think in a lot of ways, learning to not care what other people think and to let go of control like that and just be like, okay, some people are going to jump to the wrong conclusions. There's nothing I can do. I'm not going to, I can't respond to every message. I let it all go. And now, when people say mean things on the internet or whatever, and not that stuff happens very often anymore because it's not as relevant. It's in the past a while back, but I don't care. It's kind of like, okay. And I think that's a superpower in a lot of ways.
Helped you grow, too. Mm-hmm. So, you have to people, what fascinates me is, is talking about the documentary is the relationships. To me, Rocky is like it's a love story. It's not a boxing movie, all good, so if you look at, last lines of the movie are, I love you, so it's like, Both of them said that. So, you know, basically that's what interests me is the dynamic, not climbing a rock so much in the documentary, which is very, you know, that's the quest. That's the they call that the MacGuffin in a movie, the thing that everybody's trying to get, a thing. But the relationship is really the lifeblood of the engine that kind of moves the story. And that's what's the most interesting. So, you know, those challenges, you know, you saw that in the documentary too, you know. I'm sure there was more that weren't shown. But, you know, also, volatility is rough on relationships. Mm-hmm. You know, you've seen that, like, you know, when somebody's career takes off and the other person, I'm thinking about Chad Lowe and $1 Million Baby. I don't know if you're familiar with, you know, they got divorced.
I think I watched the Angelina Jolie movie like a long time ago.
But yeah, Melinda, you know, whenever there's a change, you always see that in Hollywood. There's a change in the careers, you know, oh, that person's career changed or something happened, the volatility, and after they're getting divorced, because there's, you know, so when all this volatility was going on, that's a very volatile moment. You know, people were, you know, you went to the Oscars, I assume, right? You know, you're dealing with all kinds of, like, you know, bullshit and fun stuff. And ugly stuff and plastic stuff, you know, it's the people that aren't real. And then people looking at eye to eye and saying things that you got to be, you know, navigating through that stuff is interesting to me. Tell us a little bit about the volatility of that time before we move on. I just kind of, you know, before I like brush off that chapter of your life, you know, because it's an interesting dynamic, you know. So what was that like? You know, how did you navigate through that particular aspect of it? You know, not to get too heady on it, but, you know, that'd be interesting to kind of know, like, what was going on with you emotionally at that time and your perspectives of that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it was volatile in many ways. I mean, I think that my partner is he's very level-headed. He's very focused on, like, what is real. And so I think one of the things that really helped us navigate that time was the fact that he was really good at just being like, let's focus on what's important. Let's focus on what's in front of us. Let's focus on what's real. What's real is our life and our desires. And it was this, like, very grounding force going through it. You know, he never got swept up in any of it. And he's an incredibly humble person, and he's not in it for the, you know, the fame. He's in it for the climbing. And so I think that, you know, and he, you know, he's worked hard to make a lifestyle to make sure that we can support our family and do all these things, but, like, he's really in it for the rock climbing. And I think that just having the main person that you experience with that be so grounded and so focused on, you know, like, hey, we have a party tonight, but, like, we've got 4 hours till then. Like, let's go on a big hike and, you know, get dirty and go rock climbing and play in the river or whatever, and then shower real fast. But, you know, it keeps everything in perspective, right? You're like, what really matters is that I'm having an experience with my partner. It's not this, you know, this event or this thing. And you know, I think we just tried to focus on the fun parts about it, the parts that were totally wild, the parts that were like, this will never be our life again. You know, we are, you know, dirtbag climbers who are going to spend most of our time sitting in the dirt at the crag. This is a once in a lifetime experience, and just trying to focus on that. But it was definitely volatile at times, and, you know, there's no way out but through. You just, like, in some ways, you know, how did I navigate it? I mean, I just continued to wake up each day and be like, okay, this is what we're doing today. And you have a lot of conversations, you work on your communication, you know, but there's no magic button that's like, well, I meditated for 20 minutes every day and then it wasn't volatile. It was just like, no, it was totally bonkers. And all you could do was wake up each day and try again and be like, okay, today, this is my tactic. Today, this is my tactic. And focus on the parts that were fun, and focus on the parts that were exciting, focus on the parts that were, like, again, that were once in a lifetime about the whole experience. And yeah, and I think that largely worked for us. And, you know, I think if I could go back and do it again, I think I'd get even more fun out of it. You know, because in the time I'm still, like, dealing with the publicity and dealing with being it. But, you know, now I'm kind of like, oh, well, I've already done all the hard work. I could go back and I could really have a fun time with it.
Right. So, you know, just talking to you and even in the pregame, your personality, you're in touch with all your emotions. You have a wide range of emotions. You're able to express them. Your husband's kind of an opposite than you. It's like, it seems, I don't know. This is just a person observation from watching a documentary and then talking to you. And I mean, aren't you kind of opposites, like personality wise, as far as like you're very extremely personal as to where, like, from what I saw in the documentary, he's more drawn in, somewhat. Is that true? Am I close here on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very different people. I'm much more emotional. I'm much more communicative. I'm much more drawn to the vulnerable, the intimate. And I think Alex is definitely more private. I think we often joke that like I experience emotions from 1 to 10, 1 being the saddest and 10 being the happiest. And he lives more in like a 5 to 7 range, right? Like, or a 3 to 7 range, or however you want to put it. He lives just more in this sort of middle ground. Like he's not there for the super, super highs or the super, super lows. He's just a lot more steady. And in a lot of ways, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they look at their partners, they're like, we're really different people, like there's something attractive about that. There's something cool about being with somebody who brings out a totally different side of you. I think I make Alex more open to those further ends of the spectrum, and he makes me more steady. And that's a good thing.
I'm laughing because this lady, it looks like Marilyn Monroe behind me. That's my mom. And that's Don Rickles over there. And she had the personality of Don Rickles. And she had every emotion in the book. And my wife, she's more reserved, but she's complimented me. She's taught me how to be not so crazy, and vice versa. She's, maybe she's got a little bit more wackiness to her now, so after all.
Right. That's a beautiful part of marriage. I mean, you're not the same person. And so you just get to enjoy whatever qualities they're bringing to the table and appreciate your own. It's, no one's better off or worse off or however they're showing up. It's more just about deciding that you either like it or you don't. But I like it. Like, I like I don't believe that our partners, our life partners, should check every single box that we need. If I need someone to be on level 10 with me, I can go find a girlfriend to do that with. If I need, someone to hold my hand at level 1, I've got family members who could, but, I think it's okay for your partner to, they don't have to be all of the things for you.
Right. I think it's important sometimes to have the opposite of something because, you don't want, exactly, want all those things. I also do like a number system, so like a 1 to 10, you can describe things like that. It's actually a very personal development aspect of saying like, and well, there's shades on a level 1 to 10. What is this, which is a nice segue into your coaching. What does that look like? So when did you start that? How'd you navigate into that? And what does that look like? What do you do?
So I work as a life and transition coach, and my sort of niche is helping people live more courageous, intentional lives. I want to work with people who feel like maybe they got trapped in a template that wasn't designed for them, wasn't made for them, and are interested in branching out of that, whether that means a career change, a location change, a relationship change, maybe it's a communication change. They just are really trapped by, sort of expectations of how they show up, or they're trapped by a lack of boundaries. I think it can look lots of different ways that this transition to a more courageous, intentional lifestyle. And I'm kind of here to support people in any facet of that journey. But I do one-on-one coaching. People come to me, they sort of tell me what's going on in their life. They tell me about where it is they want to go. And we go on that journey together. And it's not about me having a template that I'm like, you have to do this. This is what I did, and it's the best one. It's not about me knowing what they need or me being able to read minds. It's about me being really good at leading people through a process of figuring out what it is they want, because they know themselves the best. And I'm here to kind of pull that out of them and then give them sort of the courage and the the strategies to go about and make that change. And I work with people usually for a couple months at a time. They'll come for 2, 3, 4 months, or they'll show up to, it's all remote, but they show up to coaching sessions for 2, 3, or 4 months. And, we navigate a change. And then sometimes people will go back to their lives. And then 5 months later, they're like, oh, I have a different transition in front of me. I want to work on that with you. But I really love what I do. I really love working with people in this way. I really like helping people live lives that light them up. I think that's what the world needs, is more people who are excited to wake up and live their life every day. And there's a lot that goes into that. There's luck, there's privilege, there's drive, there's motivation, there's time, experience, so many things that go into it. And I'm just here to be like, let's just focus on what we can control. What can we control about your circumstances? Okay, let's go change those things to be whatever it is that you want. And I believe in that process.
I love that scenario though. And I do talk about that on past podcasts, quite a bit, of somebody's doing something that they think they should be doing and then them transitioning into what they want to do. That's a kind of a thing. I've talked about that, so people forgive me for, kind of getting into this again, but you're somebody that did that, and that's what you coach on. So might as well talk about a little bit. You were doing something, you were working at a job, your bio, it said you're working at a job, and then you decided to just totally transition. What were you doing? And then when did you say, hey, you know what? This is what happened to me, and this is why I did it?
Yeah, I was working in the marketing department for a small startup energy efficiency software company. I actually loved my job. I love marketing. I did a lot of event planning, kind of management. And I was living in the city. I was living with 4 different girlfriends in a big house, 30 minutes outside downtown. And I loved my life. I worked at the same company as my sister. Her husband works there. I had a bunch of friends basically at work. There was a lot that I loved about it. I would often bike commute to work and get to see seals and eagles on my bike ride. Seattle can be a pretty magical place. And, I loved that life, and I don't think I ever wanted to. It was never about running away from that. It wasn't that. It was more just this feeling that I had other places to be too. It was more about what am I moving towards versus wanting to leave something else. And so when I initially left, I didn't do it with there was no hard door slam. It was just we'll see if I come back to this, and maybe I won't, but wherever I go, it's going to be because I want to be there. So just kind of trusting that process a little bit. But I kind of knew I had taken some time off after college. I worked in high school and college. And so when I graduated from college, I kind of was, my cousin and I went to Europe for a couple months, and we cleaned an Airbnb in exchange for housing, and we lived in Spain for a while and visited some family in Amsterdam. And I kind of just realized, I was like, wow, you can do, if you work and save enough and you're young, you don't have kids, you don't have a ton of responsibility, you can kind of make your money stretch and you can go live this lifestyle. And if you aren't too picky and you're willing to be a little bit uncomfortable. And so I kind of knew I wanted to do that again, but I also knew, okay, I gotta build up my finances again. I gotta work on paying off my student loans. So I went back to the city and I was working. And then eventually I was like, I think I'm in a pretty good place. I'm ready to go back on the road again. And that timing lined up also with me meeting my now husband and kind of getting swept up into his lifestyle a little bit. And eventually, after being on the road, I kind of had this runway with my money where I was like, okay, I have to, have this much time, and then I need to figure out what I'm going to do next. And this is something I actually talk to clients a lot about. I think that a lot of people equate living passionately with living recklessly. And I'm a big believer in designing passionate lifestyles as practically as possible in a way that honors your commitments and honors your responsibilities and honors your finances. It doesn't have to be, you throw caution to the wind. I very much was like, okay, here's how much money I have. Here's how much time that gives me. So I've got like 3 months where I can think about absolutely nothing and just have fun. And then on month 4, I need to start thinking about career options. At month 5, I need to be starting to apply places or have some sort of plan. And I need to be making more money by month X, and I'm not sure it's quite that organized, but there was a there was a template.
You encapsulated that well.
And so but I knew that I wanted to coach eventually. I just wasn't really sure when. And what ended up happening is while I was on the road, I decided to get a loan from my family to do coaching school. And which is not as expensive as lots of different types of schooling. It wasn't a huge loan, but I got a loan and I decided to go to coaching school. And, I was like, I'll give this a shot. And if it's not working by this time, then I'll go back to marketing. I have that skill set and I'll make it work. And I think it was good that I'd kind of built a skill set that gave me a backup plan. It gave me a backdoor option if I needed it. And also that I kind of had a plan that gave me a little bit of time and flexibility to try it out. And then, that was 8 years ago now or something. And 7 or 8 years ago, it was a while ago. And I've been coaching ever since. And it's kind of branched into different things. I also run retreats, and I do that. But it's all kind of in the same space, this sort of like this intersection of life design and the outdoors.
Good. I'm glad. I just wanted you to explain that because I thought that was important, because we do talk about that quite a bit. And that's what you do. This is supposed to be an outdoor adventure story, but I got it so much into your personal life because I just thought it was dynamic. So let's just do one story because you're climbing mountains. I've talked to people that have climbed Everest and all this, so I have to ask, give us 1 or 2 stories that really stick out in your mind where, it was interesting as far as a quest, a climb, in particular. That'd be fun, and then also always a near-death experience is always good. That's something that's dynamic like that. So anything that comes to mind?
Oh, gosh. So a couple different things come to mind. Actually, interestingly, one of the first stories that came to mind is not a climbing story, but it is a story from when I did the John Muir Trail. Mm-hmm. And I think I mentioned earlier that we decided to do it in October, which is unseasonably late, which is the reason being that usually that's when the first snow arrives to the Sierra. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really know that much about backpacking. And I remember the day before we left on the trip, I was talking to my sister and I was kind of talking her through my gear, and she is much more experienced than I was. And I was like, yeah, and I have these pants, blah, blah, blah. And then she was like, well, are your pants synthetic or cotton? And anybody who spends a lot of time outdoors, that, there's this saying, cotton kills, right? Like you don't want to get caught in a rainstorm or in the cold in cotton because it sucks the warmth out of your body. It's not a very safe material to have in the outdoors. It's much better to have synthetic products, which won't cool your body temperature down as much if they get wet. And I was like, well, there's just some cotton pants or just like some canvas hardy pants that I thought would be good in the outdoors. And my sister freaked out because she's also like, she's an engineer. She was like, you can't go do this 2-week journey where there's going to be, like a 10-day stretch where you see no one and there's no resupply, there's no anything in these cotton pants. And so the whole trip, I'm like, oh my gosh. But I didn't have time. We were leaving the next day. We have our permits. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm like, these are the pants I'm going to wear. So we start our journey, and the whole time we have a little sat phone. We can get like a few messages here and there. And so my partner was sending us weather updates. And at some point he's like, yeah, there's a storm coming in, like it's going to snow. Like the first snow is here, it's coming. And we, and in my head, I'm like, I can't get wet. I can't get wet and then be in the cold all night. Like I'm going to freeze. It's also the Sierra in October. I was not like in the Himalaya. I mean, right. It's not that it's not dangerous. I mean, the mountains, the mountains make their own weather, as they say. It can be extreme in the Sierra too, but I was so nervous. And so it starts snowing. And what we had learned was that our map showed some of these backcountry huts along the way. There's probably like three or four in that area. There's three or four huts that they use, rangers use. So backcountry rangers will use them in the summer, and they'll live out of the hut for, like it's just a little wood structure for a couple weeks at a time, and be rangers in the backcountry and whatever, doing science or checking in on people or whatever. And so we had realized that all of the huts were closed. Nobody was in the backcountry anymore. But, often one of them that we had been to was unlocked. And so we knew that sometimes if you could find these backcountry huts, you could get some shelter. And we had a tent, but we just were kind of like, we're going to need more. It's going to snow, or we were unprepared. And so we're at the base of this, when you're in the Sierra, you're kind of going up and over all these different passes, and the journey can be broken down by what pass you're going over. And we were at the base of the next pass, and we knew it was about to snow, but there was supposed to be a hut at about 3/4 of the way up the pass. And we're standing there making this decision, like, okay, are we going to camp right here, like pretty exposed in the snow, or are we going to hike further up the pass, which makes it more exposed, more snow, but more, colder, but with the likelihood that we're going to have shelter tonight. And we're like, we're going for it. So it starts snowing, and it's getting really snowy, and I'm getting very wet, and I'm getting very cold. And we get to the spot on the map where the hut is supposed to be, and we're walking around, and there's no hut. And then suddenly I look down, and I realize that I'm standing on a platform where a temporary hut could be erected, a wood platform, but the hut is gone. It was an impermanent shelter. Yeah. And the shelter, the platform had been covered in snow, so I didn't even notice it at first. But I was like, oh my God, there's no hut. And now we're 3/4 of the way at the pass. I'm wet, and it is dumping snow, and it's windy. It's starting to get very stormy. And, we end up setting up our tent, and I just remember that whole night being like, a tree is going to fall on us. I'm not going to be able to be warm. We're going to do this past the morning, and all my stuff is going to be wet. And, I was pretty cold for a couple days, but it all ended up completely okay. I was cold, and it snowed a lot, and it was very hard to hike the next day. But, the thing about walking is that you just keep walking. You just are like, yep, I'm cold, and yep, I want to be out of the snow, but I'm just going to have to go up and over this pass to get there. And so we did it. And it was one of those moments where I was like, wow, I was very scared, and everything was fine. Yeah, well, obviously it could have been a lot worse, and I was very stupid for having fans back there, but we got lucky, and it was fine.
So the moral of the story is one word: Gore-Tex.
Right. Gore-Tex isn't always that breathable, though.
That's old school. There's probably a new material. Gore-Tex is like 25 years old. There's probably something a lot better than Gore-Tex. I just thought, I don't know. It's the first thing that entered my mind. I'm older. So
no, I think the moral of the story is be slightly more prepared if you're going to go in the backcountry by yourself in the fall.
All right. As we come to a close, I like to ask a long-term 30,000-foot view, your career, your life. What do you got stored for yourself?
Do you say what do I have in store for myself?
Yeah. As a coach, certain personal development, you could be very Zen-like about it, but do you plan ahead like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25-year plan? Do you do that?
Yeah. Looking at the arc of my life, I'm very excited right now we're very much focused on raising our kids. Mm-hmm. So I think my view right now is very much focused on raising my family, creating a really safe, wonderful, welcoming home for them, and knowing that, I have no idea what they're going to like, if they're going to like the outdoors, if they're going to like climbing or whatever it is. I think I'm just excited to see what it is that lights them up and help them pursue that. I'm excited about growing my retreats. I'm excited. For me right now, when you're pregnant, you're pretty excited to get back to all of the physical things you did before you were pregnant. Right. And, I do some hiking and climbing and stuff during pregnancy, but it's definitely not the same. So I'm excited about my own journey with climbing and hiking and being outdoors. I have a lot of goals I want to reach, and I want to do them in the next 10 years. I want to do them while I'm young and healthy, and then continue that relationship with the outdoors, also when I'm older, and just kind of maintain, my relationship with my husband, maintain my relationship with the outdoors, and maintain a relationship with my kids, knowing that they all kind of require and might want or need very different things. So I focus on that. I'm doing a lot of writing projects right now. I'm excited about writing, excited about kind of taking a lot of the things I've learned and kind of developed from being a coach and putting them to paper. And yeah, so a little unorganized, but there's an arc.
There's a lot there. And you know what? You're having a good time. You look like you're having
mostly focusing on having a good time.
And it's fun to watch. So tell everybody how they could find out again about you.
You can follow me on Instagram. I'm Sanni McCandless Hannold, I think, on Instagram. I'm not sure if I changed my handle or not. Sanni, Sanni, Sanni something. And you can check out Outwild, OUTWILD, outwild.co is where I run my retreats. We actually have tickets on sale right now for a retreat we have in September. Our women's retreat is sold out, but we're going to do more of those in the future. So for folks wanting to make the outdoors a bigger part of their life, who want kind of an entry point into the outdoors, or maybe who, used to do tons of outdoorsy things, but had got kind of trapped in some other reality for some amount of time, but are ready to get back to it. Outwild's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful community. And so you can, learn more at outwild.co.
All right. Sanni Honnold, thank you so much for sharing. Outstanding.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It was wonderful to chat with you.
Thanks for joining us. Gear up for your next adventure and head over to BOLOTOR.com to check out the amazing Bolo Pack and their other innovative outdoor gear. Catch you next time.